Point of view. It is our weekend edition, an opportunity to look at all sorts of things that have been happening this week. And of course, last night was the presidential debate for the Republican Party. And of course, there was somebody missing. We'll talk about that in just a minute, but that will be really the focus for a lot of the discussion initially. But we'll also be talking about a couple of other issues as well. One of our participants today is back from Snowmageddon up there, as they had the Nor'eastern in Washington, and there was a March for Life. There are all sorts of religious liberty issues you need to know about, so we have a lot to talk about today. Let's go around the roundtable. First of all, Kassie Dulin has been with us many times before, the Director of Legal Communications, and this time last week, you were up into your eyebrows in snow, weren't you, in Washington, D.C.?
I was. It was pretty amazing to see the Capitol. Always a light color, but completely covered in snow. People sledding down. It was a lot of fun.
And you got stuck there too, didn't you? Like everybody else.
I did. I expected to be there Thursday night. I went in for the March for Life on Friday and fly out Saturday, and ended up flying home Tuesday evening. But it was worth it to stand for life.
I saw some of your Facebook posts and things of that nature, so we'll talk about that in just a little bit later. Michael Berry also with us as well. He's Senior Counsel and Director of Military Affairs for the Liberty Institute. And Michael, always great to have you with us as well.
It's always great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's go around the round table, and then we're going to have a chance to hear from some of the candidates, because we have certainly a number of clips, but this was interesting in that you had 7 individuals, all men up there, but Donald Trump was not there, and then, of course, you had the undercard before that as well. But any initial impressions that you have, Kassie, about the debate last night?
Well, as Megyn Kelly said, it was kind of difficult to miss the elephant who was not in the room last night, being, of course, Donald Trump. And I think in some ways it really benefited the dialogue that went on. It seemed like the debate ended up being a lot more substantive. The candidates had more time to talk about their issues, and there was less of a focus on personal attacks and insults, which I think is a good thing. But at the same time, I think it was an interesting strategy by by Trump, and that he decided not to show up. I'm not sure that was the wisest moves for him in Iowa, because I've spent some time in Iowa. I worked on a presidential campaign back in 2008 and spent over 2 months in Iowa before the caucus, and they're very kind people who really are interested. And for him to not show up, I think was a little disrespectful. We'll see as polling comes out how that affects him in the final standing. You know,
you have been in Iowa, and I've heard people say that people in Iowa come to expect face-to-face, right across the coffee table and in the various stores and all sorts of things. They expect to actually see the candidates. Most of us, the rest of the country, if we see a few ads, that's about as good as we're going to do, or if we're in a rally where a lot of people. So not showing up, maybe that has more of an impact in Iowa than it would somewhere else. But Michael, any comments about the debate last night?
I agree with Kassie that I thought that the debate ended up being more substantive than some of the previous debates, and so I enjoyed getting to hear the candidates lay out some of their ideas, some of their vision and policy initiatives that they want to undertake. I also think that some of the candidates fared a little bit better than the others.
Yes.
I'm often impressed, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised, but I just am, that Governor Christie does so well in these debates. Yeah. He's very good at getting drilling down to the nuts and bolts of exactly what it is he wants to say and getting his message out.
Yes. Well, again, if you want one-liners, certainly Marco Rubio and Chris Christie are at the top of the list, as well as in the undercard. Certainly Mike Huckabee always was. You worked for him, so you know that. Okay, Kassie mentioned that there was kind of an opening joke here, and that is Megyn Kelly asked Ted Cruz to talk about the elephant who's not in the room.
Let me say, I'm a maniac. And everyone on this stage is stupid, fat, and ugly. And Ben, you're a terrible surgeon. Now that we've gotten the Donald Trump portion out of the way, I want to thank everyone here for showing the men and women of Iowa the respect to show up and make the case to the people of this state and the people of the country why each of us believe we would make the best commander-in-chief.
You know, some people said the joke fell flat, but I think it's partially because people for a second didn't know where we're going with all of this. But I think it worked pretty well, and it was a good way just to remind people that there were a lot fewer insults last night, don't you think, compared to some of the things we've run into before?
Very much so, and that was something I appreciated. I don't think Donald Trump really has an ability to speak without insults, and I think it really kind of tied back to the whole foundation of what happened with his really fight with Megyn Kelly that's been going on. And some of the things he said about her were a little less than classy, in my opinion, or presidential. And I think that it was an overall good to not have that as a part of the debate.
You also had just governors and senators, with the exception of Ben Carson. We'll get to him in just a minute, and he'll get more attention probably from us than he got there. I think there were only 3 questions that went to Ben Carson, but a lot of them were having to do with votes that were in the United States Senate. So let's go to one of those. Rand Paul talking about Ted Cruz and this whole issue of auditing the Fed.
I think what's interesting about where that liberty vote goes that my father brought to the Republican Party is I don't think they're necessarily going to go for Ted. You know, Ted didn't show up. We had an audit the Fed vote, which was the biggest thing my dad had been advocating for 30 years. Ted didn't have time to show up. He was the only Republican that didn't show up for it. And so I think that vote is going to stay in the Paul household. I think more of it's coming, and it's going to grow. The NSA is another big issue. Ted said he was for NSA reform. But then he told Marco Rubio, no, I voted for the bill because I'm for the government collecting 100% of your cell phone records. I don't think Ted can have it both ways. They want to say they're getting some of the liberty vote, but we don't see it happening at all. We think we're going to do very well in Iowa with the liberty vote.
Senator Cruz, your response to that?
Well, I agree with Rand that I very much respect Ron Paul, and that I think anyone who's got to be able to win in the Republican Party has to be able to bring together the disparate elements of the Reagan coalition. You've got to be able to bring together conservatives and evangelicals and libertarians and stitch together a winning majority. When it comes to the audit the Fed bill, as Rand knows well, I was an original sponsor of the bill. I am strongly supportive of it. It didn't have the votes to pass, and I had commitments to be at a town hall in New Hampshire, but I look forward to signing that bill into law as president and to auditing the Fed and providing needed accountability at the Federal Reserve.
And one of the questions I would have, Michael, what about Rand Paul? Does he have much of a chance, or is this just a little bit of infighting that will simply go away in about 3 weeks?
It's a very interesting question. One of the things that I really picked up on was that Rand Paul's supporters really seemed to turn out in force at this debate, more so than perhaps some of the previous GOP debates I'd watched, because it seemed like every time Rand Paul had a statement to make or an answer to give, really there was a very vocal applause or very audible applause and cheers for his responses. So I don't know if that's going to translate necessarily to the polling booth, but it certainly created a strong perception that he's got some momentum gaining behind him.
There is always the statement that I like to make that politics is not just about numbers, it's about intensity. And that is really true in a caucus, because you're talking about individuals. And Kassie, when we come back from a break, I want you maybe to explain that, since you spent some time in Iowa. But we're talking about going to a gymnasium, sitting there as each individual has a chance that is supporting a candidate to give a speech. And it goes on and on and on and on. There's possibility of a major snowstorm hitting Iowa. And so the people that are most dedicated, and certainly a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz supporters might be more dedicated than some of the others, that could change these polls. And I'm going to have some things to say about how inaccurate I think these Iowa polls are, but that was going to happen right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
I'm starting to see a proliferation of bumper stickers that call for all of us to coexist. Often they're on cars with a Bernie Sanders bumper sticker, but you can find them on other cars as well. The primary message of the bumper sticker is to the religious communities. On the Coexist bumper sticker, the letters are formed primarily by various religions. For example, C is the Muslim crescent, O is the peace sign, X is the Star of David, I is the yin-yang symbol over the letter to symbolize Eastern religions, and finally the T is the Christian cross. So really, the bumper sticker is a call for all the various religions and worldviews to get along. There's just one problem. The first of those letters, the Muslim crescent, represents a religious group that generally has a problem with coexistence. Of course, millions of Muslims have made their peace with the modern world, which includes technology, equality, pluralism, tolerance, and civility. But a very large portion of the Muslim world is directly opposed to such ideas. In fact, in many places around the world, Muslims are literally at war against coexistence. The other religions and philosophies usually have been willing to coexist in democratic societies. The major outlier has been Islam. In fact, if you were to take the Muslim crescent off the bumper sticker, you wouldn't even need the bumper sticker. You know, the late Samuel Huntington wrote about this in his book, The Clash of Civilizations. There is the inevitable conflict between Western universalism and Muslim militancy. We can promote pluralism and civility to the Western world, but often we're preaching to the wrong crowd. It is the Muslim world that has a problem with these concepts. Coexistence is a great idea, but let's be realistic enough to understand which religion is most likely to resist it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Last night was the Republican presidential debate, and if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Michael Berry, Kassie, Dulin with us, and they are with Liberty Institute and are part of the roundtable discussion. By the way, I just might mention as a program note, next week we're going to have a situation that hardly ever happens. Penna Dexter is in Israel at the moment, and I will be in Hungary, so we're actually bringing in a few people that you have always heard on the program, but they'll be sitting in my chair. One of those will be Colonel Alan West, and next Friday, Louis Gohmert, Representative Louis Gohmert will be hosting. So you have a chance to hear from some other individuals, and after they've finished, maybe we'll decide whether I need to come back and sit in this chair. So, no, I'm just kidding. But it's going to be a lot of fun to hear some of their voices as well. But, Kassie, just for a minute, you've spent some time in Iowa. You were with, of course, the Huckabee campaign. Explain a caucus. Most of our listeners do not live in Iowa, and they have never experienced it. And it's really very different than just going to the polling place and voting, and even very different than even going to a precinct meeting, isn't it?
It's very different. Most of us are used to a voting process where we get in our car, we drive in, we check a box, we walk out. That's on a ballot. It's very simple. But in Iowa, it's a very communal process, and you meet at the local level, basically a precinct level, and there are over 1,700 in Iowa, and you get together. It could be in a school, a gymnasium, a home even, and you get together with your neighbors and speeches are given. So one lucky precinct will get to hear from the actual presidential candidate usually that night, but the candidates will also send out surrogates. So for example, I have a lot of friends who've gone up to Iowa for the weekend, and they'll be there on Monday night, and they'll be assigned a precinct where they'll speak in support of their candidate. And then everyone will get to vote, and they will do that on a ballot, and they'll tally it up. And if there's not enough for one candidate to be viable, that one will get dropped and they'll vote again. So it's a very communal process. And it's really interesting because you can have people walk in planning to vote for one candidate, but hear a really great speech by someone else and change their vote. So polling at this point isn't always the most accurate indicator because you're going to have so much human influence on that before the actual results are tabulated.
You know, Michael, I was just thinking of somebody who has maybe left the state of Texas and drove all the way up to Iowa and is in there and maybe speaking for Ted Cruz, we'll just say, and he says, he's been my senator, I really like him. I can see some people thinking, gosh, this guy came all the way from Texas. He came in and actually spent time in our precinct, and he thinks that the senator's really good. Well, I was going to vote for Marco Rubio or Donald Trump, but he's convinced me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that makes Iowa fascinating, obviously, with the caucus concept and as Kassie pointed out, you know, just it's that last-ditch opportunity, the Hail Mary, if you will, of kind of being able to sway voters, caucus goers at the last minute. And I think it makes it fascinating. I'm sure political scientists love studying the kind of the last minute polls right before, this year it'll be February 1st. And so, just studying what are the polling data showing on the last day of January, and then as you head into February to see what actually happens and say, well, how did that happen? Well, that's where, as Kassie pointed out, that human element really comes in, and the ability of people to connect with other human beings, to communicate a message effectively and articulate their chosen candidates' points can really, tip the balance.
Yes. And again, some of the polling is based upon a guess, and it's all it is, a guess on how many people will show up. And Steve Deace, who's been on the program, now does a talk show on another network, actually was talking about the fact that right now, for example, some of the Fox polls and the CNN polls are assuming that 300,000 people from Iowa show up for the Iowa caucus. Well, he says, let's put that in perspective. That's about a 200% voter increase from the highest Iowa caucus back in 2008, where you were there, for example. And most voters, when they talk about primaries, haven't come out that many. So if indeed you have a snowstorm, if indeed the roads are icy, Kassie, I'm not so sure those polls mean as much, because they may be oversampling the number of people that will actually show up.
I agree, and we'll see what happens on Monday night. But I'm wondering what will happen with some of the Trump supporters and those who are newly engaged in the political process because of him. Because I think one element that Trump has done a great job of adding to the process is entertainment and fun. And I know a lot of people are showing up for his rallies and his events, but we live in a generation that is kind of self-obsessed. And I think it's a lot more fun to go to a rally and take a selfie of yourself with Trump and get to put that on your social media than to get out in the middle of a blizzard and drive to a caucus location with a bunch of your neighbors and sit through speeches and then vote. So we'll see if the enthusiasm for Trump at a rally level translates to the caucus level.
I think so. Well, let's get back. One of the people that some of the focus groups said did the best last night was Marco Rubio. So let's hear a little bit of the interchange between Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush on this issue of immigration.
You used to support a path to citizenship.
So did you.
Well, but you changed in the book.
So did you, Marco.
You wrote a book where you changed their position from you wrote a book where you changed their position from a path to citizenship to a path to legalization. And the bottom line is this: we are not going to be able to do anything on this issue until we first bring illegal immigration under control. The American people have been told for 30 years they're going to enforce the border, they're going to build the wall, and it never gets built, and it never happens. It is very clear there will be no progress on this issue in any way, shape, or form until you prove to the people of this country that illegal immigration is under control. And when I'm president, we are going to bring it under control once and for all after 30 years of talking about it.
Marco, he brought up my name. I have supported a consensus approach to solving this problem wherever it came up. And then 2007, it almost passed when my brother was president of the United States. A bipartisan approach got close. Barack Obama actually had the poison pill to stop it then. And when you led the charge with the Gang of Eight, I supported it because you asked me to. I think it's important for people in elected office to try to forge consensus to solve problems. There's never going to be a perfect bill.
That gives you just a little bit of a sense of the back and forth. Immigration, a really controversial issue, Michael, and it seems to me that you had a number of comments being made by Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, to mention just a few, and I still think that's going to be an issue that a lot of voters are going to be paying attention to this year.
Yeah, immigration obviously is now become directly tied to national security. Obviously, with the refugee crisis in Europe, the events in Paris and San Bernardino. So immigration is now front and center as not only a domestic issue, but a foreign policy and a national security issue. So the three of those are now kind of being woven together. And one of the things that Senator Rubio said earlier in the debate, or it may have been later, but something that I thought that was pretty poignant was when he mentioned that why can't we have both? Why can't we bring immigration under control while also being true to our values as a nation where we are welcoming? And that's something I'd like to hear more of from more of the candidates about. It's not an either or. This is not a binary system where it's all or nothing.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about of that type of rhetoric coming from the candidates.
Yeah, not in a zero-sum game, not a binary, either or. It could be both and. But it is interesting as they get back and forth a little bit about you voted for this or you voted for that. Sooner or later Chris Christie's going to jump in, as he has. And here's again some of the comments that Chris Christie makes after you have a little bit of that back and forth.
I want to ask the people in the audience, like, I'm standing here, I watched the video of Senator Cruz. I watched the video of Senator Rubio. I heard what they said. And this is why you need to send someone from outside of Washington to Washington. I feel like I need a Washington to English dictionary converter, right? I mean, I heard what they both said. I saw it on the video. And the fact is, this is what makes a difference when you're a governor. You can change your mind. Ted could change his mind. Marco could change his mind. It's perfectly legal in this country to change your mind. But when you're a governor, you have to admit it. You can't hide behind parliamentary tricks. That's the difference, and that's the kind of leader we need in the White House. Stop the Washington Bull, and let's get things done.
Stop the Washington Bowl, and I need a Washington English dictionary. So just a few of those. Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, we have much more to talk about. But if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But let me mention something real quickly, because one of the resources we've put on our website is Pray, Organize, and Vote. It's easy to remember, POV. And the Pray section is important, and the Organize section is important. But at the moment, I want to focus on the Vote section. And that is, we have a button there when you click on it that asks the question, are you registered to vote? And you might say, of course I am. You know what? 14% of Americans think they're registered to vote, and they are not. I want you to know that 10 states on Monday closed down the registration for the primary. So if you are not sure that you are registered to vote, or again, I would assume most Point of View listeners are, maybe you're not sure that your children are registered to vote if they're of voting age, or your friends, neighbors, church members are registered to vote, then I encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, and click on that button that says, are you registered? Then you say, well, okay, then I need to register. Well, the second button is the online voter registration. And you just scroll down to the state in which you live. You can even enter your zip code, and it will allow you to register to vote. We can't make it any easier than this. And you remember the statistics. In the last presidential election, there were 13 million born-again Christians who were not registered to vote. So your first responsibility is to make sure you are registered to vote and people in your sphere of influence are registered to vote. And it's on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Kassie Dulin as well as Michael Berry, and they're with Liberty Institute. But we'd also love to hear from you, 1-800-351-1212, and I'll take one of those phone calls in just a minute. But I mentioned registering to vote, and as we went to the break, I said 10 states, and someone corrected me. There are actually 9 states next week where the deadline to register to vote comes to an end. So, and actually 5 of those states are Monday. So don't procrastinate. If you happen to be in one of those states and you're not registered to vote, and we just moved, and it occurred to me the other day, my wife is not registered to vote in the new address, and you may have children, you may have friends, neighbors, church members, or whatever. Some of you, if you're in one of those states, you need to be registered to vote by Monday if you want to participate in the primary. Now, the good news is for all of our listeners, except those of you in South Carolina, it's too late to register for the primary in South Carolina. In every other state, you still can meet the deadline, which is pretty amazing to me. But here's the bottom line. 28 states have a deadline in the next 30 days. So if you've been postponing registering to vote, and as you heard me say, 13 million born-again Christians, according to George Barna, were not registered to vote last time in the presidential election. And then an additional 26 million were registered to vote and did not vote. And these, again, we're talking about born-again Christians. Can you imagine the difference 39 million born-again Christians would make on the election? I mean, we all know what the answer to that is. And again, as I said, about 1 in 7 Americans think they're registered to vote, but they are not. So, very important issue.
Well, and one thing I think it's important for people to remember is that every presidential election in the past 25 years has been won by less than 10 million votes. So if we just had those Christians out there and voting, they could truly change every election moving forward.
How about George W. Bush elected by a little over 500 votes in Florida? I mean, you can't get much closer than that on a presidential level. And let's take some phone calls along the way, but we're also going to have a chance to hear from some of the various individuals that were participating last night in the Republican presidential debate. So we'll head out to Georgia. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call, brother. I'm calling to say I would like to tell the delegates that are running as a believer or a Christian, however they want to label themselves, that I would like to see all of them get together in a room for 3 days and fast and pray and ask God who really needs to be the one to be running for president, instead of having the evangelical or the social conservative or the Christian, or however you want to label us, to vote. Instead of splitting our votes up, how about let's get behind one candidate and put that one candidate in office.
Yeah.
And that's what I'd like to see the candidates do.
It's been really hard to do that. And one thing that happened this time, and we have reported on this before, is a number of prominent Christian leaders got together and evaluated who they would support, and they concluded that they would all either support Ted Cruz or not say anything. So there has been this really frustration that a lot of our listeners have had. Michael, I'd love to get your comments, Kassie as well, about the fact that the evangelical vote gets split all the time. And as a result, sometimes that is made the impact of the evangelical vote a little less significant.
Well, and, one perspective is that that's what makes America great, right? The fact that we can have these divisions and continue to coexist and to move forward. And on the other hand, obviously there's a lot of frustration expressed by, especially by those who care very much and very deeply about what happens in our nation's capital and from there on. Obviously I'm a religious liberties lawyer, and so I pay very close attention to how these things affect the world of religious liberty. And I can tell you that there have been empirical studies that show that probably the most important factor when it comes to a First Amendment case that affects religious liberty issues is going to be who the President of the United States is, and that's because the President, as we know, gets to appoint federal judges. Who the federal judge is actually, according to the data, the deciding factor in terms of whether or not religious freedom will be protected or not. So from in my world, the religious liberties world, which is something that I would assume that many, and if not most, of our listeners care about, who is sitting in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is extremely important in terms of whether or not we get to keep our religious freedom in this country.
Kassie, one of the things that we've said with Kelly Shackelford, and I wrote in just a piece that's now gone out, the next president will appoint 2 to 3 Supreme Court justices, and right now we have kind of a split court. It's 4 and 4 with the Constitution is whatever Justice Kennedy thinks it is that particular day. But more than that, over almost 8 years, if indeed an individual is reelected, that individual almost appoints close to half of the federal judiciary, and those are the people that Kelly Shackelford and Michael Berry and everybody are interacting with. So we should be asking those questions too. Who would they put in the court, and are they going to be sympathetic to social issues? Are they going to be sympathetic to religious liberty, right?
I completely agree with you. And I think it's not even just the justices, but you have to remember that whoever is leading the administration, they set the tone for everything that happens in all the federal agencies and the regulatory agencies. And a lot of the attacks that we're seeing on religious liberty are actually not coming from the legislature, where we have majority Republicans in the House and Senate, but from regulatory agencies. So I think our next president will be really crucial. But what actually encourages me is that we do have so many good candidates. Like, as we all know, last Friday was the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and most of the presidential candidates were talking about it and saying, I would do what I can to repeal this, and I stand for life. And I know a lot of people are frustrated. Some people who really like Donald Trump, but some people don't because of his stance on the issues. But right now he's polling at about 35%. And what's important to remember is that means 65% of the vote is still up for grabs. And that's divided right now between a ton of candidates. But the process always happens. People drop out, and then we all get together and pick one. And then there's a lot of votes still up and available for them.
We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, but let me come back to the debate. And, of course, we saw the conflict between Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush a little bit. There's kind of an interesting conflict between Ted Cruz and the moderator as well as dealing with the issue of Chris Christie. And here's how that unfolded.
Senator Christie, you have compared both Senators Cruz and Rubio to Barack Obama, saying that we cannot afford another inexperienced president. You've also said that Senator Cruz's vote to curtail the NSA surveillance program made America less safe. Is either of them ready to be commander-in-chief?
The fact is, what we need is someone on that stage who's been tested, who has been through it, who has made decisions, who has sit in a chair of consequence, and who can prosecute the case against Hillary Clinton on that stage. That is exactly what I am ready to do.
Governor Bush.
Chris, I was mentioned in that question.
No, your name wasn't mentioned, Ted.
Actually, I don't think your name was mentioned. I think the vote, no, sir.
Chris, your question said you've attacked.
I think
the
question was about, it's not my question that you get a chance to respond to. It's his answer. You don't get 30 seconds to respond to me.
Your question was you have disagreed.
You don't get 30 seconds to respond to me. I'd like to go on, sir. I know you like to argue about the rules, but we're going to conduct the debate.
Chris, I would note that the last 4 questions have been Rand, please attack Ted. Marco, please attack Ted. Chris, please attack Ted. Jeb, please attack Ted. Let me just say this.
It is a debate, sir.
Well, no, a debate actually is a policy issue, but I will say this, gosh, if you guys ask one more mean question, I may have to leave the stage.
Well, again, that was another one of his jokes, whether you thought it worked or not, just illustrating, again, the amount of tension on that stage and the attempt to try to get some airtime. Very significant. Any comments from either of you?
Just from a macro level, something I've observed, I guess, my perspective, my opinion on actually the campaigns on the GOP side from the very beginning has been, it's been really hard to differentiate, 3 or 4 of the candidates from each other. And so I think that's creating some tension, is because they recognize that, their staffs recognize that, and they're trying to figure out how thinly they can slice it to show and demonstrate to potential voters, look, my guy is different than this guy, and because of whatever the reason happens to be, and the only way they can do that is to really try to show how different they are on a specific issue, which I think if you were to get these guys together in a room, they'd probably be very, very close on almost all the issues, I think they would be very friendly towards each other. But when you put them in a cauldron like this, it's almost as if you're forcing them to have to go after each other to show, I'm tougher than so-and-so, or I have a better position on this issue than so-and-so. And so it's almost, to me, I don't like it because I see it as being a little bit artificial.
Yeah, I think it is too. The one individual that hasn't been doing this is Ben Carson, and he only got 3 questions. So again, there have been people that have called on this program, what happened? And of course, we can go through all of that, but let's give Ben Carson his due, because at least he was asked a question about making tough decisions.
Well, I will gladly confess that I'm the only one on stage with no political title. You're not going to hear a lot of polished political speech from me, but you will hear the truth. And I don't think you have to be a politician to tell the truth. In fact, sometimes it's not that way around. And I've had more 2 a.m. phone calls than everybody here put together, making life and death decisions, put together very complex teams to accomplish things that have never been done before. And we are in a situation right now in our country that we
Our conversation with Ben Carson, and we'll come back and hear the rest of his comments right after this.
Talk about New York values. New York City officials are now supposed to fine people for doing something called misgendering. Under a legal guidance set forth by the city's Human Rights Commission, the city will now fine people $125,000 to $250,000 for addressing a transgender by the wrong pronoun, or for refusing to let transgenders take advantage of single-sex facilities or programs. One religious liberty attorney said you can be fined up to $250,000 if you use the pronoun he to refer to a man. So, where hiring, housing, and public accommodation are concerned, gender is defined solely by the individual, not by biology and not by medical or legal documents. Even if the transgender has not legally changed their name, someone can be charged for referring to them using the wrong pronoun or title. And a person who objects to sharing a facility, like a gym locker room or a restroom, or participating in a program with a transgender or gender non-conforming person, has no legal standing to do so. This legal guidance has the backing of New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. This affects New York businesses. If a company's dress code forbids men from dressing like women, including wearing wigs or makeup, it could be fined up to $250,000. Company health plans are required to cover gender-affirming care, like voice training, hormones, and surgery. It's not just New York. One day after Christmas, Washington State's Human Rights Commission adopted a new set of policies that make it illegal for businesses to limit sex-specific facilities, i.e. bathrooms, showers, and locker rooms, to persons who possess the anatomical parts of one sex. Each person must be accommodated for the gender they declare themselves to be. The rules apply to businesses with 8 or more employees and also to schools. Schools must allow students to use restrooms and locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. If someone objects, the complaining student must find another facility to use. In fact, it's illegal to even ask someone who appears anatomically not to belong in a restroom or locker room why he is there. Thankfully, state legislators are drawing up plans to officially oppose this. One, Graham Hunt, says, "I've received emails from folks who have been abused and taken advantage of in intimate private settings because someone had access to a facility that they shouldn't have." Washington State has also joined New York City in making it illegal for a business, or in this case a school, to deliberately apply a pronoun to a person other than the one he or she prefers. In other words, in Washington, as in New York City, you can be fined for calling a male he if he wants to be a she. This agenda is spreading to cities and states across the nation. It's madness, and it has got to be stopped. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Michael Berry with us, Kassie Dulin, and I hardly ever miss the clock, but I was so engrossed with our conversation, I realized that the clip for Ben Carson's was a little bit longer. So let's give him his due and go back to, again, the question that was asked of him is about making tough decisions. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I will gladly confess that I'm the only one on stage with no political title. You're not going to hear a lot of polished political speech from me, but you will hear the truth. And I don't think you have to be a politician to tell the truth. In fact, sometimes it's not that way around. And I've had more 2 a.m. phone calls than everybody here put together, making life and death decisions, put together very complex teams to accomplish things that have never been done before. And we are in a situation right now in our country that we have never been in before. We need people who think out of the box and can solve problems, can utilize the resource around them, very smart people, to focus on the problem and solve the problem. The American people are terrified. That's why we have this abnormal situation going on right now. We don't need more of the same solutions. We need different solutions to solve the problems and to save our nation.
So again, Ben Carson, and we will get to John Kasich. You'll hear all 7, but just the way the clips came together, a lot of people like Ben Carson, Kassie, but just don't know that he's going to go anywhere. Although nationwide, isn't he still on 4th or something like that in terms of popularity?
Yeah, he's still polling pretty well, and I think that is because you just gotta love the guy. I mean, he's so kind and gentle, and I think that is such a contrast to Trump. But one thing that really caught my attention is that clip is how he talked about, I'm going to tell you the truth. And that's something that I don't hear, especially someone else who's an outsider, is Donald Trump speaking about. And really, I feel like the theme of what Carson was saying is, look, I'm going to do the right thing, or what I believe is the right thing, even if it's not what's best for me. And with Trump, I feel like I can be pretty sure he's going to do what's best for him, even if it may not be what's right for the nation. And that's just not the kind of leader I'm looking for. I really believe last night, I was thinking, why didn't he go to the debate? I'm sure there were pros and cons. I think he made the decision based on what he thinks would be best for him. And it's just not something that I'm looking for in someone who's going to lead our nation and be faced with some extraordinarily tough decisions.
Well, again, we have to choose a commander-in-chief. And Michael, an individual that is the director of military affairs, you have to feel like this individual is going to be able to lead an army. And that's always been maybe the Achilles heel or the weakness that some people have had with the issue of Ben Carson. True?
Yeah, I think, actually, you could extend that to some of the other candidates as well.
That's true.
While certainly military service and being a veteran is not a prerequisite, nor should it be necessarily for being president, I do think it's certainly a plus if you have it.
Right.
Because it demonstrates that, as Kassie astutely pointed out, an understanding, a willingness of service before self, of committing yourself to a greater good. And so I think when somebody has served in the military, not only do they at least demonstrate at some level an understanding of that, but also it gives them an experience. It's an experiential advantage in terms of understanding how the military operates, what it takes, what our service members often sacrifice in order to serve this nation. And I think so. When somebody is a veteran, there's an implicit understanding. Okay, at least they're not going to forget about us.
Well, and again, if you think about it, traditionally presidents have had military service. I mean, obviously Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy. You can think of course, even Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush. You go down that long, long list. This time it didn't really help Lindsey Graham and it didn't really help Rick Perry, but we have had a couple of presidents who have had no experience with the military and maybe even a little bit of antipathy towards the military. Is that a fair statement? I think you would agree. I got him smiling on that one. I knew I would. That's indeed the case. And so that's something to think about as well as you pick who will be the next commander-in-chief, right?
Well, and one of the other things, too, is that the commander-in-chief is primarily responsible for establishing and formulating our national security strategy.
Yes.
And our national security strategy, while in and of itself is not purely a military document, it's from that document that our national military strategy is developed. It's based directly off of the national security strategy. So a president with little to no military or foreign policy experience is going to be a little bit out of their league when it comes to developing a national security strategy. So even if they don't have that experience, like I said, it's not a prerequisite. They'd better make sure they surround themselves with people who are very well experienced and who understand exactly what's at stake when it comes to developing our national security strategy.
Let's take some more phone calls, and I think Tressie wants to talk about what Donald Trump was involved with, listening on KBJS in Texas. Tressie, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir, you're welcome. I just wanted to defend Donald Trump just because everybody else keeps putting him down. He's a very good man. He does good for everybody that he can. And while he missed this debate, he was doing something wonderful for our wounded warriors. He was having a fundraiser for them there right in Iowa, not very far from the debate.
Just down the street. Yeah. Hey, he raised what, $6 million? Well, how much did he raise? I think it was $6 million, wasn't it?
He raised $6 million for our wounded warriors. And to him, that was more important than any debate.
Well, what about this? I've said before that you don't have to go to a debate. And the assumption has always been, in terms of politics, that if the media calls, you go. And I would imagine, especially since we're talking with the director of legal communications, if somebody calls and says, I want to talk to Michael or I want to speak to Kelly Shackelford or whatever, you go. But I think there are times when you say, nope, I'm not really interested in going to that format. And I think that was what Donald Trump decided, that there was nothing to be gained and a lot to lose if he showed up on that stage last night. Your thoughts?
I agree. I think that was part of his analysis of, all right, is this going to be something that is worth my time? And at this stage in the game, I think it wasn't. I really appreciate the fact that he went and raised money for wounded veterans. I think that's honorable and very noble. But I find it interesting that that wasn't his primary objective. It's not like he said, oh, man, I already had this scheduled, and so I'm going to have to cancel the debate. He was already planning to be at the debate, but then scheduled this after the fact. So it does leave a question in my mind about his order of priority.
Yeah, well, again, Michael will just have to evaluate after the fact whether this was a stroke of genius or whether that was a misstep. But I guess we won't know until after Monday night, will we?
Yeah, and, I can only evaluate a candidate based on their record, and since Donald Trump doesn't have a political record, I can only evaluate him based off of statements that he's made. And while certainly he's lately said all the right things from the way it sounds and from perception in terms of supporting our veterans, there have been previous statements that he's made years ago in which he's denigrated veterans and specifically disabled veterans, and and really put them down and said that he does not support them. So there's a at the best, we would say that Donald Trump has a conflicting record when it comes to supporting our wounded warriors.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to give you a chance to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Have some more clips from Jeb Bush, as well as John Kasich and some others, and then we do want to move on to some other topics. March for Life was last week, and Kassie was there, so I'd love to hear her comments, and we have a lot to talk about in terms of religious liberty. You might remember the story of Coach Joe Kennedy. Well, he's out there speaking on this issue, and you might remember the Kuntz cheerleaders. Well, there was a decision that came down that's positive, so we have a lot more to cover, and we will do that in the second hour. But just again, let me mention that this is the time for you to make sure that you are registered to vote and people in your sphere of influence are registered to vote. The deadline to register to vote in the primary next week takes place in 9 states, 5 of them on Monday. So if you are not registered, time is up. Go get registered. You might say, well, how do I know if I'm registered? Well, click on our button there that says Pray, Organize, and Vote. You will see there is a button there that says, are you registered to vote? You actually put in your information, and it will determine whether or not you are actually on the voter rolls. And then if you say, well, and I need to register, we have the online voter registration. We can't make it any easier, so please make sure that you are not one of those individuals that cannot vote in the primary because you're not registered to vote, or that maybe somebody you know is not going to vote because they're not registered. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
An extremely rare opportunity is about to pass you by. February 1st, this weekend, is the deadline to reserve your spot on a trip to the Holy Land and places from the book of Acts and Revelation with Kerby Anderson. Do yourself a huge favor. Even if you think there's no way, at least give it a look. 10 days in Israel, or 7 days in Greece, or see it all in 15 days. Click the Journey to Jerusalem banner at pointofview.net. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to realize you can do it this year. But you have to reserve your spot and make a deposit now by this weekend. Imagine yourself in Caesarea and Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, in Capernaum, on the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, Masada, the Temple Mount, the Garden Tomb, then the thrill of Greece and the footsteps of Paul, Athens, Corinth, Berea, Thessalonica, Philippi. See the full schedule at pointofview.net. Come on, take that step. Pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Journey to Jerusalem with Kerby Anderson and Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As we've been mentioning, last night was the Republican presidential debate. We've been hearing from Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Marco Rubio. A little bit from Jeb Bush. We'll hear more about that from him this hour. Chris Christie, Ben Carson, to mention a few. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We have Kassie Dulin with us, as well as Michael Berry, and they're with Liberty Institute. We have links to their website and also some articles that you might want to read as well. This hour will also, as we move away from some of the conversation at the Republican presidential debate, also talk about the March for Life that took place last week, as well as some of these religious liberty issues. But let's go back to the phones. One of the comments just before we took the first hour break was about Donald Trump. David in Texas, I think you want to speak to the issue of Donald Trump. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for letting me. I just wanted to say, basically, and I may expand just a little bit on what I told the screener, you know, I have liked a lot of what Donald Trump said and was actually seriously considering him. And I applaud him for what he, supposedly did last night in raising money for the wounded warriors.
Yes.
However, I did hear in the wee hours of morning as I was heading to work on a news program that there's some organizations that's saying that he doesn't represent them, and they wouldn't accept any money from him. But the real gist of my call was, if he's going to run from little old Megyn Kelly, how can I trust him to stand up to Putin, North Korea, Iran, the Middle East, leaders that, when things get a little bit tough and sticky with them?
Well, I was expecting one of the candidates to say that. I guess it's sort of implied by some people, but that's a question that some people are going to ask. And when you do that, of course, that's at least a question that people can put on the table. I don't think he's going to run away from some of those individuals, but it's a good question, and it's certainly one that... Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I mean, he pretty much, it's although the Texas primary is still, a couple of months away, about a month now.
Yeah.
And it's still kind of up in the air. I mean, I was actually considering him.
Well, obviously,
it's very doubtful now.
Well, and again, we'll see whether or not that is seen, as I said, as a stroke of genius or a misstep, and I think we'll find that out Monday night or Tuesday morning, don't you think?
I think so, and I think that's one of the challenges with Trump, and I think it's something that a lot of people are just starting to have some questions based on his behavior, but also the statements he's making, and the problem is he has no record. With most of the other candidates, with the exception of Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina, you can go look at a voting record or a legislative record, how they governed, how they voted. But we don't have that with Trump. And so it's easy for him to say whatever he wants to make him sound good to a certain segment of voters. But the concern is he really going to back that up? When things get tough, when someone a little scarier than Megyn Kelly is before him, will he really hold the line and advance conservative values? And I think that's something that's a very important question for people to ask about all the candidates.
Yeah, I think the caller makes a very interesting point, which is, or at least highlights an interesting thing, which is that in this case, or at least with respect to, I would assume to be many people who are still undecided, the no-show ended up backfiring on Trump. here's somebody who said that, I was considering him before. I wasn't 100%, rock solid, but I was at least considering him. And now I'm not so sure. And so I think that's important to note. And I also am so glad that we brought up the fact that the mere fact that Trump did this event for one Wounded Warrior, organization or charity does not mean all of a sudden that Trump now speaks for Wounded Warriors. I mean, look at Jeb Bush. He's had, I believe it's 12 Medal of Honor recipients who've now endorsed him. But in no way can he claim to have now the unfettered support and endorsement of. And so I just think that we have to be so careful, and the candidates need to be careful not to allow the fact that they've done one particular thing or had one specific endorsement or even a group of people endorse them, that now they speak for that segment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You mentioned Jeb Bush. Let's get to that, because one of the questions was asked if he is part of the establishment. And I get the sense that in his answer, he kind of owned some of that. So we'll get to that in a minute, because I think is one of those issues, are we in a sort of an anti-establishment mindset? And so let's hear what Jeb Bush said.
Establishment because my dad, the greatest man alive, was president of the United States, and my brother, who I adore as well, is a fantastic brother, was president. Fine, I'll take it. And I guess I'm part of the establishment because Barbara Bush is my mom. I'll take that too. But this election is not about our pedigree. This is election about people that are really hurting. And we need a leader that will fix things and have a proven record to do it. And we need someone who will take on Hillary Clinton in November, someone who has a proven record, who's been tested, who's totally transparent. I released 34 years of tax returns and 300,000 emails in my government record. To get information from Hillary Clinton, you need to get a subpoena from the FBI.
Well, and again, that's one of those issues that some people are talking about, whether or not an indictment is going to come down against Hillary Clinton. And you got to give Jeb Bush credit. I mean, I released all my emails, my medical records, my financial records. That helps, because later on, as we all well know, sometimes there is a bump in the road because somebody says, well, if I'd only known that. And so that's probably wise on his part. But again, the issue of the establishment. Let's take another phone call. And we have talked about Marco Rubio, and Loretta in South Carolina on the Good News Network would like to talk about Marco Rubio. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, he's just on all the ads he's been running on television. They say he outsmarted the Democrats on the health program. What did he do that outsmarted the Democrats? It looks to me like they got exactly what they wanted.
That's what I'm wondering. I mean, again, you are in South Carolina. First of all, let me just offer my condolences for those of you that live in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, or Nevada. You have been pummeled with ads that those of us in the other 44 states or 46 states have not had yet. So you're talking about an ad that I've not seen. But how did he outsmart the Democrats on the Affordable Care Act? It seemed like the president got everything he wanted and the Democrats got everything he wanted. So I'm not so sure I have an answer for that one. So Loretta, you've stumped us on that one. But I'll tell you what, I'll try to figure it out and see if we can answer next week. How's that?
That's fine. I'll be listening.
Yes. But again, Marco Rubio is certainly appealing to a broader constituency. He seems to be rising a little bit in the polls. Is that what we're finding right now?
We definitely are. And I think that that's partly one of the things I think people appreciate is that he has a forward-looking vision. He talks about the new great American century. Donald Trump's about let's make America great again. He said, let's make it the great American century. And I think that's very appealing. And that positive message is resonating with voters. We'll see what happens, though, when we actually get to voting. Well,
we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to depend on Michael Berry here for just a minute. We're finally going to have a clip that talks about foreign policy and military policy. How do we defeat ISIS? That was a puzzle to me. I think that's still one of the big issues in the top one or two, how to fight terrorism. And a lot of the discussion last night had to do with very important issues, but some ones that were of concern to me we'll be talking about right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, I'm starting to see a proliferation of bumper stickers that call for all of us to coexist. Often they're on cars with a Bernie Sanders bumper sticker, but you can find them in other cars as well. The primary message of the bumper sticker is to the religious communities. On the Coexist bumper sticker, the letters are formed primarily by various religions. For example, C is the Muslim crescent, O is the peace sign, X is the Star of David, I is the yin-yang symbol over the letter to symbolize Eastern religions, and finally the T is the Christian cross. So really, the bumper sticker is a call for all the various religions and worldviews to get along. There's just one problem. The first of those letters, the Muslim crescent, represents a religious group that generally has a problem with coexistence. Of course, millions of Muslims have made their peace with the modern world, which includes technology, equality, pluralism, tolerance, and civility. But a very large portion of the Muslim world is directly opposed to such ideas. In fact, in many places around the world, Muslims are literally at war against coexistence. The other religions and philosophies usually have been willing to coexist in democratic societies. The major outlier has been Islam. In fact, if you were to take the Muslim crescent off the bumper sticker, you wouldn't even need the bumper sticker. You know, the late Samuel Huntington wrote about this in his book, The Clash of Civilizations. There is the inevitable conflict between Western universalism and Muslim militancy. We can promote pluralism and civility to the Western world, but often we're preaching to the wrong crowd. It is the Muslim world that has a problem with these concepts. Coexistence is a great idea, but let's be realistic enough to understand which religion is most likely to resist it. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to wind down some of the comments made during the Republican presidential debate and then move on to some other topics. But if you'd like to join us, you can still do so. 1-800-351-1212. In studio with me, Michael Berry and Kassie Dulin. And I might just mention, Loretta a minute ago was asking about a Rubio ad. And Kassie, you actually played it here for a minute, and I think I figured it out. And that is, yes, he outsmarted them in the sense that he figured out a way that you could actually put together a way to defund the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. Now, it wasn't successful, so I'm kind of back to what Loretta said. Where was the success? You know, yes, he figured out a way that if you could get enough votes, it would have defunded Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. So at least I understand that. So, Loretta, I guess we don't need to investigate it anymore, but at least the New York Times in that point said that he was a Republican figuring out how to defund and eventually replace Obamacare, but that's not going to happen until you get a new president, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's get into some foreign policy issues, and we're privileged to have with us Michael Berry, the director of the Military Affairs for Liberty Institute. And this is what Jeb Bush said about how to defeat ISIS.
The caliphate of ISIS has to be destroyed, which means we need to arm directly the Kurds, embed our troops with the Iraqi military, re-engage with the Sunni tribal leaders, get the lawyers off the damn backs of the military once and for all, have a no-fly zone in Syria, and create safe zones to deal with the refugees, but more importantly, to train a Sunni-led force in Syria to take out ISIS with our support on the ground and air.
Again, all ideas that I would agree with. But again, back to Michael, what you said, I've seen in the piece that has been put together by everybody from Ted Cruz to Ben Carson, they've all said those same things as well. If there are 5 or 6 points, I think I found those even in some of the presentations that they have made. So it's difficult to differentiate yourself because a lot of the people on that stage agree with that. But what they said on that stage is very different than what President Obama is doing right now. Fair?
Oh, absolutely. And many of those talking points, I agree with you, Kerby, that a lot of them sound great. They sound like they are the types of things that would be effective, that are kind of rally the troops, wave the American flag. And for a lot of people, and I don't say this necessarily as a bad thing, but some of those phrases that were used, boots on the ground and carpet bombing, ISIS and stuff, tend to be somewhat of a dog whistle, if you will, for hawkish Republicans. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm saying it is what it is. I think what we really, just as a veteran myself, as somebody who's served in the military, who's been over to the Middle East, what I will say is that what the troops want is a strong leader. And by a strong leader, I don't mean somebody who is going to smash their fist on the table and yell and scream. What I mean is somebody with vision, and then who's willing to get out of the way and let the experts, in this case the military, do. Jeb Bush alluded to this, that our military has really been hamstrung and had their hands tied behind their back by a lot of their job, and execute that vision, execute the mission. And many people would say, and I think the just meddling with the military by the executive branch, and really, yes, we are under the control of the commander in chief, but at the same time, to be a good and effective leader, sometimes you have to understand what your limitations are and get out of the way and let the experts do their job. If a plumber comes to my house and needs to fix my sink, I'm not going to be in there, grabbing his hand and say, no, wait, you need to turn the wrench this way and not that way. I'm going to get out of the way and say, here, sir, you're the expert, please.
These refugees from Syria and other places that have been, this was more of a debate that took place in the past, but some of it surfaced there. But our good friend Gary Bauer is going to be on next week, as a matter of fact, I think with Colonel.
Do a good job.
Yeah. Well, and this is an issue that also has surfaced where we've talked about what points out that you had one refugee camp that was put together by the French, and the Muslim migrants were basically rioting there because this place was known as the Jungle. And it's a place which was basically a tent city housing about 6,000 people, squalid conditions and all the rest. So the French government decided that it would cost more than $21 million. They would build better temporary housing with heat and showers and bed and electricity. So they were ready then to relocate the migrants to this newer and nicer facility. And then things got really ugly. And that's because to move them, the French authorities wanted to do just one thing. They wanted to fingerprint the migrants, and they would not go. And as a matter of fact, they rioted again. And so, again, you can see that if they did not even want to be fingerprinted, this kind of gets us back to one of the other issues that's kind of surfaced in this debate, and that is, does it make sense to put a temporary pause on the number that come here from Syria? Do we need to find a better way to vet some of these migrants? Because indeed, some of these Muslims were just not even going to allow themselves to be fingerprinted. Michael?
Yeah, I can't remember which candidate it was, but they brought up an excellent point last night that really resonated with me, and that was that it may have been Rubio, and he said, if we're going to look at immigration and immigration reform, he said, why don't we start with the kind of the antiquated system that we have right now? We base our immigration policy based off of rules that were, implemented the last century, in the last millennium, if you will. He said, we need to have an immigration policy that reflects reality, the current reality of this millennium, of this decade. And so I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that was a very astute point that he made, that our immigration policy needs to be overhauled and reformed to reflect the reality that, just as you identified, Kerby, that's going on right now, is on the ground.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to South Carolina and the Good News Network. Mike, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Oh, I love what you guys are doing. I haven't heard Trump really come up with any plans. I mean, I haven't heard him come up with what's he going to do about, military health care, any of this stuff. And Carson, I mean, I've actually heard plans from Carson. Carson has...
yes, he's had quite a few. He's had one on flat tax. He's had one on defeating ISIS, and we've actually posted a lot of those on our website. And so he's been very specific, which I think you have to when you don't have a record to run on. So
right, and he's got other newspapers have already printed that he has the best tax plan. He's gone and interviewed some of these refugees and told the plane, start safe zones. Don't bring them here. Start safe zones in their own country. I would question why they would want to come here when we could set up a safe zone in their own country. He's also said, wouldn't tie the hands of the military. And I just don't hear Trump saying any specific, So I like Carson, I like Cruz, but I just don't hear Trump saying anything specific of what he's going to do.
Yeah. Again, if you're Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, or Donald Trump, I think you have to be much more specific, because if you don't have any specificity, then it's just platitudes, isn't it?
I completely agree. And I think that, again, it ties back to your record. If you've got a candidate who says, hey, I'm pro-life, you can say, all right, well, let's look. When the 20-week ban on abortion came up, how did you vote on that? When you were governor, what did you do when this bill came before your desk? But with the candidates who have no record, you have to know that if you can't go on a record, to me, you've got to know that they're a person of integrity and what their principles and morals and values are. And for me, at the very least, I'm looking for a long-term track record of that. And when you can't prove to me that you even have a track record of holding those positions over a long period of time, it really makes me question if I can trust anything that you're saying at this point.
Let's go to Illinois. Louis, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to the conversation?
I'd like to add a conversation about Donald Trump. I think the next election, be Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or somebody.
Yeah. Well, and again, right now, those are the two front runners, aren't they? It's something to really think about. Let's take a break. And when we come back, I'll take a few more phone calls, but we're going to move on to some other issues that you need to know about, the March for Life and religious liberty. And I noticed one of our callers here wanted to also address this issue, that they actually told them to remove some signs because of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. You've heard of that one, haven't you, Michael?
Absolutely.
Here we go. So we'll get into that, and we'll talk about a couple of victories and some other ones that need to be addressed. So there is a lot to cover today. So we'll give you a chance to join the conversation along the way. And of course, if you want to still make some comments about the debate last night, we'll take those calls, but also want to move on to a few other things that you need to know about. And that's why we have this roundtable set of guests. And again, I'll say one more time, because I thought it was important for you to know that we are coming to a time in which if you want to vote in one of these primaries, sorry, too late for those of you in South Carolina, but everybody else, you can still have the opportunity to register to vote. But in 9 states next week, that evaporates, 5 of those on next Monday. So that's the deadline coming up. And so then in the next 30 days, 28 states will have a deadline, and that will be it. So if you are not registered to vote, or more importantly, you probably are, but you may know some people that you're not sure if they're registered to vote, show them where they can actually go on the website and click on that button, "Are you registered?" and then show them that they could actually register and participate in the primary. Let's take a break. We'll come back with some more phone calls and lots more topics right after these important messages.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone or write a check or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Quite a number of phone calls today, and we'll stay on the the Republican presidential debate for a little bit longer because many of you have some comments. And Michael Berry with us, Kassie Dulin. Let me at least play one clip from John Kasich because we wanted to cover all 7 of those on the stage. And he was asked about being part of the establishment. And as I look at our screen here, again, some of the questions about establishment. So let's see if we can hear from John Kasich because he was asked about whether he's part of the establishment. He was talking about a third way.
Well, I had a national reporter say, there's 3 lanes. There's the establishment lane, the anti-establishment lane, and then there's the Kasich lane. And the reason is that I've been a reformer all of my career, fighting to reform welfare, fighting to reform the Pentagon, also being in a position to balance the budget, because that is very, very hard to do. And in Ohio, of course, I had to bring about big reform again because we were so far in the hole, and now we've just found out that we are up over 400,000 jobs since I took over as governor. The situation is this. We cannot fix things in this country, the Social Security, the border, balancing the budget, getting wages to grow faster, unless we lead as conservatives, but we also invite people in from the other party. We have to come together as a country, and we have to stop all the divisions.
So again, just a couple of comments that you might have heard from different candidates on the stage last night. One, of course, was not there, Donald Trump. And let's go to Susan in Georgia, WGNN. I think you wanted to address the Trump fundraiser last night. Go for it.
Yes, I heard on the radio this morning that the Wounded Warriors organization has been using funds for all kind of fancy hotels and all kind of parties and stuff like that. And I just wondered what you know about that. And I don't know if they're saying generic Wounded Warriors or that organization. And I just wanted to see if you knew anything about that.
Well, Michael, that's been an issue that has surfaced more than once. So it's something that people are talking about in terms of the fiduciary responsibility that some of these charities have. And this is one that's sort of been targeted because of some of the expenditures that seemed a little bit over the top.
Yeah, I want to be clear from the outset that I'm unaware of any allegations of misconduct or any violations of any crime by the Wounded Warrior Project. However, with that being said, many of my veteran friends and colleagues who are still in the military are highly critical of the Wounded Warrior Project because they perceive them to mismanage their funds. Namely, their executives are extremely well compensated, especially when compared to other organizations that do similar work. And many veterans, you will find, highly recommend that people's money would be better put to use, at least. I mean, if you want to donate to the Wounded Warrior Project, that's absolutely anybody's right to do so. But if you want to ensure that your dollars are going to be used for actually going towards helping wounded warriors, they're more likely to be used in that manner if you donate to some other organizations.
So again, just something to pay attention to, and we'll probably cover that a little bit more. Let's also get into a couple of issues that surfaced last night. One about who you would point to the Supreme Court. Beth, in Texas, KAVX, we also heard that Hillary Clinton had some people that she thought she might want to put on the Supreme Court. So what did you find out?
That was brought up by one of the candidates that she wants to appoint Barack Obama as one of the Supreme Court justices.
I don't. Didn't we find out that he said he wasn't interested, Michael?
Maybe so. I don't know. I had never heard of that before. I had even forgot about the justices. I mean, that was not anything I had even thought about until it was brought up.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Maybe he's just not interested.
Well, whether he is or not, Michael, is it fair to say, and see if I've got this right, you really have 4 justices on the Supreme Court that you can definitely call liberal, and you have 4 most of the time you can call conservative. John Roberts, okay, maybe not, but most of the time. Okay, so you got 4 and 4, and then Kennedy. It seems to me that the next president probably will have a chance to appoint 2 or 3 justices and probably will swing that court. We have not had a court that is really swinging in one direction. It kind of swings back and forth, sort of. And it seems to me that there is a stark difference between the kind of people that Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders would put on the court and the kind of people that, say, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio would put on the court, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I've often said, just again from my own personal perspective, one of the questions I would love to hear asked, and I don't think it ever will just because it wouldn't necessarily work for practical purposes during a debate, but I would really like to know who the candidates would appoint. if they were elected. I would want to know who would be your senior cabinet officials. Who would you nominate as Secretary of Defense? Who would be your Secretary of who would you appoint to the Fed, et cetera, et cetera. I want to know who are your senior level cabinet officials and who would you appoint to the Supreme Court, because I think that shows a far deeper understanding of many different issues, many layers of issues that are going on in our country, as to know who candidates would appoint, as opposed to just say, what's your position on this particular issue.
Yeah. And when we don't know let's take Donald Trump, sometimes he said some things that make me wonder. You notice I didn't pick him as an example because he is the big question mark. If indeed he becomes the next president, I'm not sure who he would appoint to the Supreme Court. What have we found out?
Well, my understanding is that he's talked about one of his family members who he'd appoint, who is his sister, exactly, who's a strong proponent of abortion rights. And I do have to say, too, about President Obama, of course, we've never seen any politician who said, I don't want that position and change their mind on that. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for that. But yeah, just as you were saying, I mean, on Inauguration Day in 2017, 4 justices will be 78 years of age or older. So that is a lot of justices that will have a huge impact. And it'll have an impact on, if you're an American, it is going to have an impact on an issue that's important to you. I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, if you care about abortion, or if you care about Obamacare, or if you care about the economy. The justices that are elected are going to directly impact your life. And that's why I so appreciate what y'all are doing, Kerby, by encouraging people. You have to register and you have to vote if you want to make sure that your life is going to be influenced in a way that is right.
Let's get to another phone call, and we're going to get into some of these religious liberty issues. So I thought we would go out to Kansas, KNEO. Cindy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call. I'll try to do this as briefly as I can, but shortly after September 11th, 2001, 8 Pittsburgh, Kansas postal employees who had all served our country erected a banner on our post office which read, "God Bless America." And the sign has been there all along. And yesterday it was removed. I guess last summer, the local branch of the post office received a letter from Freedom from Religious Foundation, headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. And it said that the citing of the United States Postal regulations prohibits the display of any religious materials other than stamp art on postal property. Well, they kept it up quite a while, but then they heard from a Madeline Ziegler, and she's a legal fellow for the FFRF, and she said the complaint was from a local resident who said that and they believed it violates separation of church and state. So it was taken down. It caused quite a buzz, both ways. But I wanted to let you know that a local business here in Pittsburgh, Jake's Fireworks, made an announcement yesterday. They got it out on Facebook and several other ways that starting at 11 a.m. today, they would give away 3 foot by 6 foot banners and 18-inch by 24-inch yard signs free to anybody who would drive out there and get them and put them all over and saturate the city with them. And I went out to pick up one for my daughter and I both residents, and I'm telling you, I couldn't even turn into the industrial park for probably 20 minutes. The line was so long. So it kind of had maybe not the effect that if the person was offended just going to the post office, I think they're going to be really offended now. But is it really violation of church and state?
Again, I wanted to get to Michael because, when people have these kinds of questions, certainly they want to know where to go. And we have the link, of course, to Liberty Institute. And when we come back from the break, I thought we would just talk about that a little bit. And that's a good setup for some of the other religious liberty cases. Kassie has a couple to share with us. And, of course, she was also at the March for Life. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about this. And if you find yourself in your community dealing with something which maybe something was taken down or some lawsuit was threatened from the Freedom from Religion Foundation or Americans for the Separation of Church and State or whatever it might be, we want you to know that you have a legal advocate, and they're actually sitting right across from me right here. So we'll talk about those issues. And of course, for those of you in the military, that's one of the reasons for you to get to know Michael Berry, because he's the Director of Military Affairs at the Liberty Institute. Let's take a break. We'll get some answers to those questions right after this.
Talk about New York values. New York City officials are now supposed to fine people for doing something called misgendering. Under a legal guidance set forth by the city's Human Rights Commission, the city will now fine people $125,000 to $250,000 for addressing a transgender by the wrong pronoun, or for refusing to let transgenders take advantage of single-sex facilities or programs. One religious liberty attorney said you can be fined up to $250,000 if you use the pronoun he to refer to a man. So, where hiring, housing, and public accommodation are concerned, gender is defined solely by the individual, not by biology and not by medical or legal documents. Even if the transgender has not legally changed their name, someone can be charged for referring to them using the wrong pronoun or title. And a person who objects to sharing a facility, like a gym locker room or a restroom, or participating in a program with a transgender or gender non-conforming person, has no legal standing to do so. This legal guidance has the backing of New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. This affects New York businesses. If a company's dress code forbids men from dressing like women, including wearing wigs or makeup, it could be fined up to $250,000. Company health plans are required to cover gender-affirming care, like voice training, hormones, and surgery. It's not just New York. One day after Christmas, Washington State's Human Rights Commission adopted a new set of policies that make it illegal for businesses to limit sex-specific facilities, i.e. bathrooms, showers, and locker rooms, to persons who possess the anatomical parts of one sex. Each person must be accommodated for the gender they declare themselves to be. The rules apply to businesses with 8 or more employees and also to schools. Schools must allow students to use restrooms and locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. If someone objects, the complaining student must find another facility to use. In fact, it's illegal to even ask someone who appears anatomically not to belong in a restroom or locker room why he is there. Thankfully, state legislators are drawing up plans to officially oppose this. One, Graham Hunt, says, "I've received emails from folks who have been abused and taken advantage of in intimate private settings because someone had access to a facility that they shouldn't have." Washington State has also joined New York City in making it illegal for a business, or in this case a school, to deliberately apply a pronoun to a person other than the one he or she prefers. In other words, in Washington, as in New York City, you can be fined for calling a male he if he wants to be a she. This agenda is spreading to cities and states across the nation. It's madness, and it has got to be stopped. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Spent a fair amount of time talking today about the Republican presidential debate, but since we're into the issue of religious liberty, wanted to cover that. But Michael, give us some principles here, because it does seem to me that whether it's Cindy there in Kansas or listeners across the country, many times they say, well, is there a way to stand up for my religious liberty? How can they do so?
Well, any American in this, can stand up for religious liberty. I mean, as we've been talking about all day, the first and probably the most important thing you can do is to vote.
Yes.
Register to vote and then actually exercise that right to vote. But beyond that, it's educate yourself. Go on to libertyinstitute.org, which is available from the Point of View website, and we have provided a, I'll use an SAT word here, a cornucopia of information to the American public to learn about what your rights are. We have religious liberty kits available for schools, for churches, for people in the military. These are kits that provide lots of information, lots of cites and references to court cases and laws and regulations so that people can actually know, has been going back to what Ben Carson said, the truth. This is what the truth is. This is what our Constitution says. These are what our laws say. It's pretty popular. It's pretty cliche now, but some people still don't realize that the term separation of church and state does not appear anywhere in our Constitution. Mm-hmm. It's important to know that. And so, first, it's vote. Second, it's begin educating yourself on what your rights are. And then third, stand up for those rights. Mm-hmm. Don't allow yourself to be bullied. Don't allow your school administrators, your mayors and city officials, your law enforcement officers, don't allow them to be bullied by organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They often pretend to know the law, and they'll take an ounce of truth in the law, and then they'll twist it and distort it and make it sound like what they're saying is actually true when it's not. They're often incorrect on the law, and people will be scared by that because, it's a legal organization. They might sue us. And so they'll back down, they'll capitulate, they'll give in, and they'll cave. And now you've lost your freedom because once you take that first step of retreat, it's really hard to earn it, to fight to get it back.
Well said. And let me just mention that those religious liberty kits, there's 6 of them. So there's Religious Liberty Protection Kit for Christian schools, Religious Liberty Protection Kit for churches, Religious Liberty Protection Kit for ministries, Religious Liberty Protection Kit for students and teachers, Religious Liberty Protection Kit for U.S. military, and Religious Liberty Protection Kit for the workplace. You covered it all. So if you are in one of those, or you're probably in more than one of those 6, those are kits available at libertyinstitute.org, and we have the link there on the website, and you can find out a little bit more. And if there's a lawsuit that needs to be brought, that's why you exist, right?
Absolutely. And if you happen to be the 1 or 2 Americans that somehow don't fall into one of those categories, give us a call. We're more than happy to discuss with you whatever issue you want to talk about and see if we can help you.
A lot of kits that are available. Let's talk about some of these cases. One is the Kuntz cheerleaders. Again, we've talked about this on the program many times before, but these were young girls that were just posting banners that the football team would run through. And when they started using banners that had Bible verses on them, you can't have that. Well, it turns out that the most recent ruling came in favor of the Kuntz cheerleaders, didn't it?
That's right. At about 9 a.m. this morning, we were on the website for the Supreme Court of the state of Texas. And in an 8-0 decision, they said this is an important issue. They sided with the cheerleaders who had asked for it to be reviewed. And they said this is something that we really need to look at. So it was a victory for us. And as we're working on this issue to try and protect religious liberty and free speech rights. And so now the case will go back to the Court of Appeals and they'll look at it. And we believe that with the opinion that the justices came out, we're in a very strong position and hope that they'll finally settle this case for the cheerleaders' rights to express their religious beliefs.
Can't do any better than 8-0, can you?
No, you can't.
One of the other articles we've posted here is about Coach Joe Kennedy, the coach who used to be employed up there in Bremerton, who would go to the middle of the field at the end of the game and pray. Well, he's been speaking out, and not only have Liberty Institute been posting things that he has said, but other people as well. So if people want to follow the case of Coach Joe Kennedy, they can go to Liberty Institute, can't they?
They can. They can go to CoachKennedyFacts.com. That's even a little bit easier to find, and learn more about Coach, who's just an amazing guy, 20-year veteran in the Marines. He had a troubled youth, but then he was taken into a boys' home and found the Lord, and it just turned his life around. And he has been pouring himself into the lives of the young men in this community and turned their lives around. And just a great guy, and we're honored to be fighting for his rights.
Michael, you've been with him, and just seems like such a class outfit, and certainly a classy guy. And appreciate all the people around him that have just always been supporting him. And we all need to kind of uphold him in prayer and pray for what is the next step, don't we?
Yes, and just like both Kerby and Kassie said, I mean, Coach Joe Kennedy, he really is, no pun intended, the average Joe, and it's so often it's just interesting when I'm up in the Seattle area with him because he's so unassuming. Everybody, it seems that he meets is an old friend, and he's got so much support in the community, which is great, which is extremely important in these types of cases. And so it's really outrageous to think that this school district is continuing to dig their heels in. Going back to when the issue first blew up in the national media, I really thought we would have the opportunity to sit down face to face with the school district, with the superintendent,
Yes,
with the school
right.
and
Mhm.
that this would be a misunderstanding that we could work out. And unfortunately, that's never been the case. We've never been able to meet with them. And so, really, our hand has been forced into this situation where we've had to take, this legal action. But we're confident of a good outcome.
Yeah. Kassie, I wish we'd had more time to talk about the March for Life. We can do that in the future, but we have posted an article here. And even if the press didn't say there are a lot of people turning out, I've seen the videos of you walking in the midst of the snow. And I'm really encouraged about the future of this country because people of your generation, and even older generation, are out there marching and saying, we stand for life.
It was unbelievable. Even though there was the storm of the century
Yes.
coming down on Washington, D.C., there were still over 50,000 people there to stand for life. And what was encouraging was there were a lot of people of different faiths. There were, and especially Catholics and evangelicals really came together. And there was so many young people there. Colleges sent in busloads of students who were there to say, I am the pro-life generation, and I stand for life. And it was really just an honor to be there and be a part. And we're so grateful the snow held off just long enough for us to complete the march.
Yeah, I'm sorry you got stuck there till Tuesday, but I'm glad you made it into here. Well, I want to thank both of you. And again, make the point of visiting libertyinstitute.org. And we have, of course, a link to some of those. And you can find out a little bit more about the March to Life, Coach Joe Kennedy, as well as we have a little bit on the Republican presidential debate. It's all available at the website pointofview.net. But one last time, I did want to just make it clear that if you have not registered to vote, or you know somebody who's not registered to vote, time is just about up. It's already been up for those of you in South Carolina. You will not be able to vote in the South Carolina primary, but for the rest of you, it's going to end on Monday, 5 states on Monday, 9 by the end of next week. And 28 states have a deadline in the next 30 days. So this is the time, if you have not done so and registered to vote or would like to help others register to vote, go to our website, pointofview.net. You'll see a banner that says Pray, Organize, and Vote. As you click on that, there's a button, first of all, in which you can determine whether you are registered to vote. And then second of all, a way in which you can register to vote online. So please take the time to do so. Don't be one of those 13 million who last time were not registered to vote in the 2012 election. That's 13 million born-again Christians. And then, of course, there were another 26 million born-again Christians who were registered to vote who did not vote. So we certainly have step number 1, and that is to make sure you're registered to vote, especially for the primary. That's where you can have a disproportionate impact. So again, I hope that you will take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. I will be out of the country, but we'll have Colonel Alan West sitting in this chair. We'll have Representative Louis Gohmert, maybe a few other people along the way. So I'm looking forward to them filling this chair, and then I'll be back after just being out a week. And I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, Chris, Shamila, as well as Rob, all those who've been involved. Thank you, and we will see you back here next week.
An extremely rare opportunity is about to pass you by. February 1st, this weekend, is the deadline to reserve your spot on a trip to the Holy Land and places from the book of Acts and Revelation with Kerby Anderson. Do yourself a huge favor. Even if you think there's no way, at least give it a look. 10 days in Israel, or 7 days in Greece, or see it all in 15 days. Click the Journey to Jerusalem banner at pointofview.net. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to realize you can do it this year. But you have to reserve your spot and make a deposit now by this weekend. Imagine yourself in Caesarea and Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, in Capernaum, on the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, Masada, the Temple Mount, the Garden Tomb, then the thrill of Greece in the footsteps of Paul, Athens, Corinth, Berea, Thessalonica, Philippi. See the full schedule at pointofview.net. Come on, take that step. Pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Journey to Jerusalem with Kerby Anderson and Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.